For over 200 years under the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan pursued sakoku, the policy of national seclusion, allowing only limited trade with the Dutch and Chinese through the port of Dejima in Nagasaki. Western missionaries were expelled, foreign travel was banned, and Japan became a world unto itself. But what if the closed country policy had never been enforced, and Japan had instead stayed open to global trade and influence during these critical centuries? The real history: isolation under sakoku. In 1639, motivated by decades of Christian missionary activity and unrest, Tokugawa Iemitsu of the Tokugawa shogunate imposed a policy of near-total isolation. Thus began over 2 centuries of closed country, wherein Japan was locked from the inside. Foreign merchants were banned, Japanese were forbidden to leave, and contact with Europeans shrank to a small Dutch enclave at Dejima. For 214 to 215 years, Japan remained politically stable but technologically stagnant, missing the Industrial Revolution that transformed Europe and America. That is, until Commodore Perry's black ships arrived in 1853, and Japan was thrust into modernity almost overnight, forced to modernize at breakneck speed to avoid colonization. The alternate turn: Japan stays open. But what if they never had to wait until Perry forced them into modernity? Perhaps the Tokugawas lose the Battle of Sekigahara against their opponents, the Ishidas, or the Tokugawa shoguns, instead of fearing Christianity and foreign influence, decide instead that trade and technology are worth the risks. In such a timeline, Japan would have remained open to European merchants, missionaries, and explorers throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. Rather than being a tightly controlled outpost, Dejima becomes a bustling hub of global commerce where Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish, English, and later French traders establish permanent enclaves. Foreign knowledge, from Western medicine to astronomy to shipbuilding, flows freely into Japan, transforming society. European physicians introduce anatomy and surgical practices, challenging old Chinese models and leading to a hybrid medical tradition that was centuries ahead of its time. Japanese doctors dissect cadavers, study circulation, and experiment with early vaccines, raising life expectancy and reducing the toll of epidemics. Astronomy and mathematics revolutionize scholarship. Jesuit star charts and telescopes reshape how Japanese astronomers map the heavens. The Copernican system arrives not in the 18th century through smuggled books, but in the 1600s, debated openly in Edo academies. Navigational astronomy equips sailors with advanced techniques, opening the seas to Japanese fleets. Industry too takes shape earlier. European metallurgy and mechanics blend with Japanese skill in steelmaking, lacquer, and ceramics. The result is hybrid innovation. Rifles of Japanese steel, clocks and precision instruments made with unmatched craftsmanship, and textiles woven on imported looms. With Christianity taking root more firmly, philosophy and religion are transfigured as well, with missionary schools teaching Latin, Dutch, and Japanese side by side. Enlightenment ideas of reason and governance trickled into the country's rigid order, planting seeds of reform far earlier than in our timeline. By staying open, Japan does not wait until the arrival of Commodore Perry's black ships to modernize. Instead, it begins that process 2 centuries earlier, laying the groundwork for an Asian power that could rival Europe long before the 19th century. By the 1700s, Japan begins to industrialize decades, even centuries, ahead of our timeline schedule. The immediate consequences: military transformation. Shipbuilding and navigation leap forward. By the early 1700s, Japanese shipyards combined their mastery of woodcraft with European hull designs, producing ocean-going vessels capable of crossing the Pacific. Firearms and artillery are no longer curiosities, but the backbone of a professionalized army and navy. These forces are not left idle. First, Japan secures the Ryukyu Islands as a permanent naval base. From there, fleets push outward to Taiwan, transforming it into an early colony. Korea, once the site of Japan's failed 1590s invasion, now falls under sustained assault supported by modern logistics and artillery, this time falling into Japanese hands. Beyond East Asia, Japanese ships begin to contest European positions. The Philippines, long held by Spain, become a tempting target. Portuguese and Dutch trade ports in Southeast Asia face sudden pressure from a new regional rival. By the mid-18th century, Japan is no longer a feudal backwater, but a rising maritime empire, its fleets patrolling the seas from the East China coast to the South Pacific. Religious pluralism. Christianity does not blend easily with native traditions. Where Buddhism had spread across Asia by absorbing local deities and harmonizing with indigenous beliefs, Christianity in Japan would have taken the opposite approach, seeking to abolish Shinto rituals and reframe the Buddhas as false idols or pagan corruption. Missionaries would denounce shrines and festivals, pressing converts to sever ties with ancestral practices. While Shinto and Buddhism coexisted in layered harmony, Christianity would introduce an absolutist worldview that rejected compromise. Periodic unrest would flare as missionaries condemned what locals saw as sacred, and communities would be divided between old traditions and a new faith. At the same time, however, missionary schools and churches provide education in Latin, philosophy, and Western science, making Christianity not just a religion, but a gateway into the intellectual and political currents of Europe. Cultural exchange. Japanese art, literature, and cuisine absorb European influences while exporting their own using methods centuries ahead of what was available in our timeline. By the late 1600s, the first ukiyo-e prints of foreign ships and missionaries circulate across European salons, a century before such works historically dazzled impressionists. Instead of waiting for Japonism in the 19th century, Baroque painters and Enlightenment thinkers marvel at Japanese aesthetics much earlier, weaving bold lines and asymmetry into their own works. In literature, Japanese haiku and no drama intrigue European intellectuals, inspiring experimentation with brevity, natural imagery, and non-linear storytelling. Philosophers in Paris and London debate the fusion of Confucian ethics and Japanese aesthetics with Christian and Enlightenment ideals. Cuisine also transforms. Japanese soy sauce, sake, and miso begin to appear on European tables by the 1700s, while Japanese kitchens adopt New World ingredients carried by Spanish galleons: tomatoes, potatoes, and chili peppers, centuries earlier than in our timeline. Sushi evolves with access to exotic spices, while European desserts are reimagined with Japanese rice flour and sweet bean pastes. Back in Japan, European oil painting techniques influenced Japanese artists, leading to new hybrids that blend Western perspectives with Japanese minimalism. Architecture shifts too. Edo skylines might feature Gothic arches and stained glass churches standing alongside wooden pagodas. The result is not one-sided westernization, but a two-way current. Japan transforming European culture while reshaping its own, becoming a central node in the world's first true global exchange of ideas. A world reordered. The ripple effects extend far beyond Japan's shores. Asia's balance of power. A modernizing Japan checks European ambitions in East Asia. Instead of facing colonization, Japan competes with European powers for influence in Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. Europe's view of Asia. Rather than being lumped with exotic Orientals, Japan is recognized as a sovereign peer much earlier. Treaties are negotiated, not imposed. China's fate. Seeing Japan thrive through openness, reformers in China push harder against Qing conservatism. The Opium Wars still happen, but perhaps a more modern Japan intervenes, supporting Chinese reformers or competing with Britain for dominance. The long-term consequences are far-reaching. By the 19th century, Japan is not the latecomer forced to modernize under threat of Western guns. It is already an industrial power. Railroads, steamships, and factories appear decades ahead of schedule. Japan becomes a global trading nation, projecting influence across the Pacific. This changes the trajectory of imperialism. Instead of Japan rising suddenly in the late 19th century, shocking the world by defeating China in 1895 and Russia in 1905, it emerges as a great power much earlier. By the Napoleonic Wars, Japanese fleets may already patrol the Pacific. By the mid-1800s, Japan could rival Britain and France in global reach. At home, the Tokugawa regime likely collapses sooner, overwhelmed by the pressure of modernization and foreign contact. But instead of the sudden Meiji restoration, Japan might experience a gradual, centuries-long evolution into a constitutional monarchy or hybrid state. Conclusion. History remembers Japan as the nation that slept for 200 years before leaping into modernity. But if it had remained open to the world, Japan might have led Asia into the modern age centuries earlier, changing not only its own fate, but the balance of global power. Would an open Japan have prevented European dominance in Asia, or simply joined the scramble for empire even earlier? If you want to know, leave a comment below. Stay tuned.